Welcome to episode 30 of Super States Practices of Transformation with me, your host, Joshua Peters. Super States explores the intersection of trance states in all the ways that you can access them with personal or professional growth. And in every episode, we talk to world class experts, industry leaders, revolutionary thinkers who share the latest information, tools, along with their own personal stories to inspire you on your journey. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast host or on YouTube so you can stay up to date with new episodes. And if you enjoy the show, give me a 5-star review. It really helps this show grow, and I would really appreciate it. This week, I speak with James Harrison. James is a clinical hypnotist, a life enrichment coordinator for elders, and an author. He's about to help us understand the link between neuroscience and hypnosis. Listen up, because here we go with the neuroscience of hypnosis, insights into the brain with James Harrison. Welcome to Super States. I'm here with James Harrison. James, I'm excited to have you on the show.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad to be here. What do you want to say
Awesome.
to start?
James, why don't you start by describing what you do and let us know how that makes a difference in people's lives.
Sure. These days, I'm a life enrichment coordinator in an elder care facility. I work with folks with dementia and complex mental health problems. And it's kind of an extended mind model where I'm helping them do task completion, which is part of what gets hard with age and with dementia. People can follow through less and less.
Mm.
But with somebody there to help them, they can have a good day. They can ground and orient to reality often, not all the time. It's a pretty cruel uh, thing that happens to the brain. It's literally degenerative. But I came into that after kind of a long history of doing jungian shadow work, becoming a clinical hypnotist, and now I'm writing a book on clinical hypnosis from my experience working in a hard science medical institution. So
Hmm.
is trying to explain it to the doctors and nurses that I work with who, depending on where they went to school and what their training was like, they may or may not be ambivalent about hypnosis. And every hypnotist has come across this a thousand times in our career.
Yeah.
I took that idea to our medical director. Could I do a pain clinic? Could I do this or that? Um, Long story short, the book comes out of that. Is there a way to describe what we do in clinical hypnosis that is distinct from psychotherapy and that kind of approach that dovetails with current neuroscience?
Yeah.
So, long story short, that's a piece of my path.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
I really, one of the things I appreciate about you, James, is you kind of have you have an artist background, right? You
Oh yeah.
were a sculptor for
Yeah.
many years, and that shifted when you started moving into the Jungian shadow work and hypnosis. And but
Yeah.
but the work that you do, like, you're not necessarily hanging up a "I'm a hypnotist" shingle. You're using all these skills that you've got to make a difference. I want to say it's not exactly like a small scale. Like, it's making a big difference, but it's doing making a big difference for these individuals that are,
Yeah.
you know at the end of their life, really. And
Yeah. It's
how,
palliative care is what we call it.
yeah, yeah, and it's you're
I
holding
love it.
space for
Listen,
them.
there's a thing. I mean, I did clinical hypnosis before COVID, and I kind of tended to fall into doing really deep dive work with folks, like 2 and 3 hour sessions, a lot of past life regression. I love doing that kind of work. it's a mystical experience for the practitioner and the client, but it's kind of weird to oh, it's noon, I got to go get a sandwich after having a profound experience, and then you can't really talk about it because you know it, without client privacy and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So a couple of those a day, it's kind of a trip. And when COVID hit, I'm like, I've got to switch it up. And I ended up, there's a backstory, but I ended up working in a care facility with 40 beds. And I love it because it's daily contact
Mm.
with lots of folks. And, the artist part of me was about, I kind of did large scale reenactments of, or my attempt at healing childhood trauma around some really bad stuff that happened to me. And a lot of us in this line of work, if we're empathic or some version of that, of having special senses, if you will, it's often because of things, adversity that we went through.
Yeah.
So the art became an arena where I was safe and had control and could manifest something um, from another realm in a way. I mean, I'm not sure how else to put it. I worked in material, but it taught me how to connect ideas and material, the immaterial and the material.
Yeah.
So that skill doesn't hasn't left me. I just the focus is not on healing myself anymore. It's on um, working with others and community and making that safe,
Yeah.
because it is about safety. We get folks that come to our facility, and I often say they come in hot.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're off the street, um, and the first thing is to make them feel safe. The parts of our brain that process where we are, it all happens top of brain,
Uh-huh.
parietal, dorsal stuff, and that's all happens up here. It's fast. It's the fastest thing that happens when stuff goes from our eyes back to what they call the occipital lobes in V1, and then it shoots up. Then another split that happens is the wet stream. So where am I happens first. Am I safe in this environment? And
Hmm.
then what's going on? Not surprisingly, if you think about it, happens between the ears and the mouth, right?
Mm.
Very midbrain, the semantic part of our brain. What's going on? Um, Naming things takes a beat longer. So I see that every day, all day with my folks. They'll come into a room and they're looking around. So I call their name, smile, do all the postural stuff to link up with them, and then I can help them find a seat. And it's absolutely what the philosophers call extended mind,
Yeah.
which is the idea that we all complete each other, right?
Right.
Or that in a social setting, somebody else is compensating for what you don't know, and you're doing the same for them, and etc.
Yeah.
Um, Turns out I love it. You know, I couldn't do the job if I weren't a hypnotist.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way. I see a lot of caregivers just bonk because they get mad that somebody has OCD and dementia, or they get mad that somebody forgot, or but it's like, no,
Yeah.
you are the missing link for that person. Then it can go well and be beautiful.
Yeah. I think that hypnotists tend to have developed a certain way um of listening, of being present with people, because we're
Yeah,
calibrating, we're
we're
tracking our
calibrating.
clients
Yeah.
to give them what they need.
Yes.
And not all therapists even do that. So it's kind of a unique skill that
We're
most of us
guiding
have.
people. It's not so that, I think the short answer on that is a lot of Western psychodynamic current therapy modalities, and undoubtedly there's a zillion of them, but generally in the talk therapy world, it's called relational, or it's considered relational. You and the therapist building a relationship that mirrors or mimics how the person behaves in the outside world. And
Mhm.
sooner or later, you're going to get mad at the therapist, and then you have something to work on, or that sort of thing. And it's like hypnosis, we don't do that.
Mhm.
We're guiding people. So, like you say, we calibrate. Like I have a patient who she's not with us anymore. Lovely woman, has Parkinson's. And from what we understand about Parkinson's, it's where the insula in the midbrain stops producing dopamine or slows down, to a trickle
Okay.
producing dopamine. So the person's motor sensory system has a hard time initiating, right?
Mm.
But, and this is not universal, but for some folks, you can get them going by entraining with them. So with this woman, I could entrain with her, very subtle, like I'm doing with my shoulders now, right?
Mhm.
And that would get her, she would start to do this. And eventually, during bingo, I would play Love Shack. Well, that's her favorite song. She would get up. Eventually, we'd do this, we'd mirror each other and dance, right?
Yeah.
She got to where I wouldn't even have to entrain her after a couple months of it. She would just get up when she heard Love Shack and she would dance for 6 minutes. It's a long song. So, occupational therapy and physical therapy come in the room and they're like, oh shit, what are you doing, James?
Yeah.
I'm like, she's fine. And they came to see, like, she is. It's like once she got going. So is she borrowing my dopamine? I don't know. I'm not going to make claims like that, but she
Yeah.
was able to get her own going. Is that a mirror neuron thing? Maybe. The research on mirror neurons is kind of 50-50 right now. The research on mirror neurons that you and I have them and we're watching, and it's the basis of empathy that jumps the gap from one person to another. And the research on that is not very old. It's a
Mhm.
decade and some, started in monkeys. But practically speaking, a lot of what I see in the hypnosis world that we're aware of is we do experience stuff like that. It's like, well, if you call it mirror neurons, that sure seems like what's happening now with me in training with this person. Is the science there yet? Maybe it's working on it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's saying no, and we're still saying yes. That's okay. We just have to, as long as we're open to studying the science and accepting when it tells us we're wrong and
Yep.
pivoting and being open to, science doesn't know everything. There's plenty of metaphysical realms it just isn't really set up to deal with. And we're kind of, a bit of a foot in each world is what it
Mhm.
seems like.
Yeah.
So, but we're definitely doing stuff that psychology doesn't really touch on. And it's because we guide people through state change.
Right.
So, she's this woman is in a rigid state where she can't move or where she's got tremors, and gradually by doing this, she gets into a flow state, and then I mean the outcome of it is it's not like her Parkinson's goes away. Her body
Right.
still or biologically is not producing dopamine. How much can we do about that? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know the medical side of, can you take a dopamine pill? Well, maybe that's called sugar. I don't know. But for those few minutes, she has a good day and she gets the rush of all the
Yeah.
other good neurotransmitters that make her feel loved and safe. And she got some exercise. So, we're not there
Yeah.
to cure stuff, just give somebody um, a better day or a reframe. And it's very different from folks in midlife
Yeah.
working with elders. So,
So as you're writing this book, I know that you have been s- doing this for I don't know, about a little over a year now, I think, and really been working with scientists as well.
Yeah.
You've made different connections with them on, well, it used to be called Twitter, whatever it's
Thank God
called
for
now.
Twitter. Yeah. I have no
And
love for Elon Schmuck. It,
can you
go ahead.
share some of the biggest learnings that you're getting
Yeah.
from the book?
So this is crazy stuff. One of the things I thought is like, well, if I'm going to try to prove hypnosis to the folks I work with and or the medical community or heal the rift with hypnosis in medicine, first of all, it's a tall order and it's a ridiculous thing to try. Who am I?
Hmm.
I don't have degrees in this stuff, but I can read. And I'm
Yeah.
56. I kind of feel like I got nothing to lose. Um, so why don't I start by trying to disprove hypnosis?
Mm.
Because it's a good scientific type of process. So I started reaching out to neuroscientists on Twitter and asking them questions and reading uh, the current literature. It's like I don't want to hear another reframe from the hypnosis end of what hypnosis is. There's crazy amounts of that, right? But I want to hear from neuroscience. What are they doing right
Yeah.
now? And I just started seeing a ton of parallels to the kind of work we do. Um, One of the first folks to really just be open to me talking to him is a researcher, a neuroscience researcher at Boston University. Um, and I remember saying to him one of Melissa Tears's terms where she talks about self-directed neuroplasticity. I said,
Hmm.
well, that's how we describe hypnosis. And I went into that with him, and he goes, James, we just call that learning. So I said, so learning's a thing? Is learning's possible? And he's like, yes, learning is fine. You're on solid footing with the idea that learning is possible. So we might call it self-directed neuroplasticity or neuroplasticity, but to neuroscientists, it's learning. And of course, they study learning quite a bit, in fact. So that was a fun moment of going, okay, we all have our lingo and our terminology.
Yeah.
It's not the easiest thing to wade into, but for some reason, at least for a while, and still, even with Twitter imploding around us, and I can't wait to leave personally. But I've got so many contacts and saved documents and research papers there, and
Sure.
I'm moving them over. Um, but it's kind of a water cooler. So you have neuroscientists from all over the world who share papers with each other, and they don't know who I am, but if I can ask a decent question, oftentimes they're happy to answer it. And in that space, there's a ton of philosophers who work in what's called philosophy of mind, which is the study of consciousness, right?
Hmm.
Anybody interested in that in our field? Um, I'm getting less preoccupied with that because, man, talk about a rabbit hole. Philosophy of mind. Don't go there if you can avoid it. It's intense. It's very very intense. I'm much more skirting the way scientists view it is all about causality and what they would call physicalism or materialism
Hmm.
and cause and effect. And then how does that you hear the term emergence a lot more these days, that
Mm.
the parts add up to more than the whole, that
Sure.
you can't look at a carbon atom and predict it could be both a lump of coal and a diamond. So how does that property, as they would say, emerge um, through complexity? And then when you get into the brain, it's we're going from the old place-based model in the brain, which was what phrenology was, which
Hmm.
folks have heard of. That this happens in this part, this happens in this part, which is not untrue. It's it's not a terrible model, but you have to add in the network property of the brain. So the brain has gray matter in places, and they often do tasks that are, well, task specific things, but the brain is so unbelievably networked that, like you hear the phrase the limbic brain all the time, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, it's that, the lead folks, like Luis Pessoa, are like, sorry, not accurate anymore. When you look at what lights up during, let's say, fear, it's
Yeah.
not just the amygdala. It's not it. A whole bunch of stuff lights up in any given task state. So I'll go into this a little bit because it is
Yeah.
interesting. There's what we call task states, which is somebody doing something, right?
Okay.
Picking your nose, farting, singing opera, using the telephone. Oh, I go to the old fashioned. Folks remember that? Yeah. So what's going on when I do that? That's a task state, and then there's resting states. 20 years ago, a researcher named Marcus Raichle wanted to test what lights up in the brain during task states versus resting states, so in between states.
Mm.
This kind of stuff, if you're a hypnotist, you're like, oh yeah, it kind of all rhymes, right?
Yeah.
So you would think that resting states or zoning out in between doing this and that, you'd be using less energy, less wattage. It's not true. They discovered that you use just as much wattage in a so-called resting state. So that's
Huh.
led to a flurry of research, and what I started gleaning from looking at things like that, and then there's a very highly regarded, maybe dean of the neuroscientists named Stephen Grossberg. He and his wife Gail Collins came up in the early 80s with this idea called adaptive resonance. And I can go into detail on that, but in a nutshell, it's fits with the oscillatory model of this, then that, this, then that, all day long, this, then that, with every task always weighing in comparison,
Mm-hmm.
comparing things. I'm like, this is a lot like association and dissociation, you
Mm.
know? And I'm like, well, if hypnosis is a thing, it has to have, there's got to be an evolutionary reason, right? I mean, otherwise it's a weird parlor trick that Mesmer came up with. There's,
Mm.
like that's not very satisfying. So there's got to be a reason. So I'm thinking about adaptive resonance, and I'm thinking about association and dissociation and task states versus resting states. It's like, to me, it's like they feel like they're talking about the same thing. Or then and so to me it occurred, what if, let's follow that way, 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 way back. To me it's foraging. It
Yeah.
goes back to approach something or avoid something.
Mm.
It's, hunt for food, gather resources, or fight or run away, right?
Right.
And that goes way back. So I'm holding this wonderful book called Brain Architecture,
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the Basic Plan. And I highly recommend that for uh, hypnotists. It's such a good read. But he starts with the brain of a flatworm and of sponges, and really, basic creatures like flatworms, and um, builds up from there. And what happens is, we did a lot of things without a nervous system before we had a nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So not everything's neural. We learned approach and avoid before we had a nervous system. And when I say we, I mean, the animal kingdom, our ancestors going back to bacteria. So if we had to approach or avoid, you, that gives you a 50-50 shot of getting it right. Well, I should have avoided that. X's over the eyes, you're dead, start again. So life
Yeah.
does another generation. And after a while from that, my conjecture is that that's how memory, or the reason there was so much pressure for memory to develop,
Yeah.
is because, I don't know, death is kind of costly, right?
Yes.
So if you had a way to compare, early memory is comparison. So you're comparing what's happening in front of you to what you recall having had happened.
Mm.
And to go from what has happened to just flip it into what we would colloquially call the future would be a super useful skill to have, right?
Yeah.
So here I am in this moment. Here's this giant thing with teeth in front of me. I am not sure if it's smiling or salivating. Oh, I remember seeing what it did to Uncle Fred. I'm going to check out right now.
Uh-huh.
So, what a useful skill. So, that to me is like the basis of association, dissociation, and it's the reason that hypnosis works.
Mm.
We guide our folks into a slow state where they can compare the thing that happened to them to what's real now, what's real and true in the moment. And they can go, oh, okay, because their system is not jacked up in fight or flight.
Right.
Um, and that's it. That's why what we do works so well, because it's a non-cognitive thing. And now there's great research papers that do describe all the, hypnotist folks know all about brain waves and alpha, beta, gamma, delta, theta. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
There's really good research on the oscillatory aspects of that. So, but I'm going to pause and breathe because that's
Okay.
a lot of stuff. So,
Hmm.
that's where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating how we are at this place where we're learning so much now about the brain and we can measure it. Like where before it
We're
wasn't
getting better.
really. Yeah, getting better at measuring it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we could make some guesses, but now you can actually put somebody in a machine and find
You're,
out exactly how their brain is
yeah.
working
So
in
you're
in
pointing out something that's critical. If you rewind the clock there is a very specific moment. This is something I wanted to search for. Like,
yeah.
why did hypnosis get kicked out of the crib? Why did we get separated out from medicine? Because up until um, 1900, we were pretty central. And so there's a guy, some folks have heard of him. His name was Sigmund Freud.
Mhm.
He was a neuroscientist. And there was another neuroscientist named Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He's less famous in America. He's on the money in Spain, baby. So he's very famous in Spain. They were contemporaries, and they were both neuroscientists. So Cajal spent his time literally drawing what he saw of neurons in the microscope, and Freud decided that he couldn't figure out what we would now call the neural correlates of consciousness. How mechanistically the brain creates your sense of you.
Yeah.
So he thought, well, I'm going to try to, instead of figuring out the brain, I'm going to try to figure out the mind. So that's when, literally 100 years ago, right now, maybe 103 years ago, his famous book, the name's spacing on me, but the one where he goes into ego and id and
Mhm.
super ego, came out 100 and some odd years ago, like 103 years ago. Um, so that was Freud's conjecture. Because he couldn't see it in the brain, he was going to do his best attempt to come up with a framework that described the inner workings. Well, they're so wrong, they're not even wrong, which is the
Mm.
term uh, this German physicist came up with when something's just completely off base. So Freud was not even wrong. Um, we can still use the term subconscious and unconscious. That's fine in a very generalized way.
Yeah.
But it turns out Santiago Ramon y Cajal, the Spaniard, was much, much, much more correct. And the reason was he did the first drawings that showed basically a cognitive loop going up and a motor sensory loop going down. And really, you could say the subconscious is the motor sensory loop.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
could say the unconscious is interoception, which is all the internal feeling stuff that
Right.
happens, everything from a hot flash in menopause to a surge of adrenaline to I need to take a poop to I feel in love. That's
Yeah.
all varieties of interoception, right? And we've tended to lump all of interoception into kind of one boat, if you will. And a lot of what we do in the hypnosis world is tease that out for people, whether
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the chakras as a metaphor for, well, that's different parts along your enteric nervous system and your autonomic
Nerve
nervous
endings,
system.
right? Clusters of nerve endings.
Yeah, and we guess what? We have clusters of nerve endings around our organs. Oh my God, who thought? So, you look at like the wisdom traditions of cultures that came up with things like chakras. Well, it's not surprising. We actually have that. And the parasympathetic is way, way slower than the sympathetic system.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's doing something different. So, no wonder when you have somebody slow down, breathe slowly, get into a slower brainwave state. Now, tell me what's true for your heart in this moment. Whoosh, all kinds of good stuff comes up.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I'm sure other folks do this. Like, okay, we're talking to your kidneys today,
Mm-hmm.
or we're gonna go in and talk to your lungs. And I remember thinking, that's fucking weird. But when you do it as a hypnotist, you're like, no, it works.
Yeah.
You slow down enough, and it's kind of like you move everything else out, and you create space for the person's lungs to really talk to the person in a way that they haven't heard in a long time, or they've suppressed the signal, or that can be a real profound thing to do with a smoker. And that's interoception. So we have much, 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 much more fine-grained and accurate ways of talking about it than Freud did,
Mm.
because at the time it was considered that the brain told the organs what to do, and there
Okay.
wasn't considered to be a reporting relationship back up,
Mm.
right? And that's afferent and efferent. So the signals coming in turn out to be important.
Yeah.
The philosophers call that the brain in a vat. That we can't, like, consciousness would not exist for a brain in a vat. Or Antonio Damasio talks about it, the somatic marker hypothesis. You need all of this, all of your body. This isn't your brain. This is your whole spinal column, your skin, your body, your guts.
Right.
It's all your brain. It's much
Right.
better to think of it that way. Reporting back in. So we're really having to shake Freud off. So in the book, I take Occam's razor to Freud.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fun with Ramoni Cajal's help. I mean,
Okay.
Freud's been killed in a lot of ways. A lot of Freud's great. I I love it. I enjoy it, but it was the best attempt 100 years ago. We really need to get past it now. But I'll give them the term unconscious or subconscious, still, kind of useful, but it misleads people.
Mm.
So when people realize, like, oh, you mean I can talk to my heart? Oh, I can listen to what different parts of my body is saying and not just try to block that feeling, yeah,
Yeah.
it's okay to listen. It's okay if that part is angry at you. If you
Yeah.
listen to it, maybe we can repair the relationship, whatever it
Right.
is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it for whatever reason, it just came back to how you interact with your people, with the dementia people,
I run a
and
card game in the afternoons, and it's beautiful because each person around the table has very, very different mental health and dementia needs to
yeah.
complete their portion of the game. So I come home, I'm dripping with sweat from that one. But it's really lovely. It's fun, and then you create group cohesion. And this schizophrenic will help that schizophrenic, and this OCD person will help that bipolar person. Blah blah blah. I don't diagnose. I'm just that's what's on their
Yeah.
charts. You know. So um, we all need each other. I'll put it that way. Like I need
Yeah.
them. My God, it's great. And I don't. Once I get the book done, I do want to ramp up my private practice because I love it, but I
Hmm.
also love the group stuff. So who
Yeah.
knows? Open to the mystery, bro.
Yeah.
Here we
I
go.
love it. When do you expect to have your book ready to be published?
So the good news is I'm writing the last part, um, but as a way to force some aspects of the middle. The first third is done. The second third is pretty close. I know what I want to say. It's just kind of I'm a 12 to 1 guy. It takes me about a dozen passes on any given part of the book to make it, well, let's use the word readable,
Mhm.
but
Okay.
also enjoyable and entertaining. And it's dense subject matter on the one hand, but I don't want to stray from my lane too much. So, to answer your question, I'm aiming to be done before next summer.
Hmm.
Um, and hopefully sooner than that. But I do want to say the name of the book because I haven't said that
Oh
yet.
yeah, let's hear it.
So it's called The Four Diamonds of Clinical Hypnosis, Bridging Neuroscience and Western Medicine. And the quick walk through the four diamonds are, let's say, four strong cornerstones, if you will, of neuroscience that aren't really in dispute. They just have good, solid research behind each of them.
Hmm.
And they are things that we do already as hypnotists. So the first diamond is state change.
Yeah.
The second diamond is interoception, which we've been talking about. The third
Hmm.
diamond is the reverse of that, exteroception, the external perception, the stuff that orients you in the world. So
Hmm. Okay.
typically eyes and ears and smell.
So there's like feeling inside,
Yeah,
feeling outside,
yeah,
noticing
exactly.
outside.
Yeah. And then the last one, I'm using the term predictive processing, which actually comes from AI, but it's another way of saying memory.
Hmm.
The uh, our bodies, our brain system is continually feeding us what it thinks we want next, right? So, walking down the sidewalk, someone's coming, they're on the same side as me. Oh, I need to switch sides of the sidewalk. Do you say that to yourself? Well, in one way or another, it happens, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that sort of thing. And then you get up and you look back up and the person switched as well. And then you got to do another postural repositioning because your brain predicted incorrectly based on prior information that you had.
Yeah.
So we all know, like, habituation is the word we use in the hypno world. So predictive processing goes into um, the memory systems, and then the intero and the exteroception is like, um, again, think of your whole body, your skin, everything as maybe a receptor, like all these finely tuned different ways of apprehending information about yourself and the world. And so it's way beyond what hypnotists call VACOG, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory.
Yeah.
That's just five. There's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
big number. Like there's ion channels in the skin alone that report touch and pain and pleasure and temperature, right? And that ain't the nervous system. That's a different thing. And of course, there's nerves that also detect pain and pleasure, blah
Mhm.
blah blah. So there's a tremendous amount. You've got one bookend of memory, another bookend of state change, and in the middle is our guts and our experience. And, how are you feeling in an aroused state? How are you feeling in a relaxed state in a given circumstance? And what is your brain remembering and telling you to do? Because honestly, it's more efficient for your brain to just feed you something than for you to have to think.
Sure.
And that there's a ton of research on that. It's in general, if folks hear the term free energy principle and
Hmm.
Dr. Carl Friston, that's what that is kind of referring to. It just takes less wattage to do the habit, baby.
Yeah.
So if you
Right.
want a new habit, guess what? You got to put some new energy into the system, but that's okay. Like it's just for a while and it's totally worth it. So if you think of your habit like a trough, right? We're down
Yep.
here.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be in this other trough over here. So there's a peak in between that we got to get over, right?
Right.
We already do that all the time. So it's not hard for our bodies to go from peak to trough to peak to trough. We do it constantly, you know. It's just finding what works for that, what motivates that person to get over that peak into a new trough that's waiting for them. Ah, luxury,
Yeah.
know.
What do you hope that this book, what kind of effect do you hope that your book will have?
I hope neuroscientists read it and go, yeah, this is fine. There's nothing outlandish in it. It's trying to shoot right down the middle on that, not make metaphysical propositions that can't be tested. Um, I want to reunite. My ultimate goal is for clinical hypnotists to be accepted on medical teams.
Mhm.
So tall order, but hey, I'm 56. I'm shooting my shot. So I'm on a medical team right now, and that's part of it because I look at the job description I have. It's perfectly except so I'm a life enrichment coordinator in, that's the hat that I'm wearing here.
Yeah.
It's perfectly fine. They encourage me to elicit people's creativity and imagination all day long where I work. Well, that's half of hypnosis right there.
Yeah.
And then there's other folks on the team, like occupational therapists, who are concerned with task completion and habituation and how can we help retrain this person to use a walker or a wheelchair, that sort of thing. Or this person has had a stroke. Now they can't use their right side as much. They need to compensate with their left until. Da, da, da. So we're already on the team, and then the physical therapists do a lot of the physiological work. Well, the roots of hypnosis really go back to physiology. So all I'm saying is we do a lot of the same things, but there are things that make us unique from each of those fields and
Yeah.
unique from therapy or mental health interventions. And that's the guide stuff. We're really good at eliciting states with, voluntary cooperating folks who want to have that happen.
Hmm.
The media and the world painting of what hypnotists do is this involuntary mind control wackadoodle shit, and I hate it. It's like it's not even wrong, but it's out there.
Yeah.
That's not what we do. I'm not interested. It's unbelievably unethical to
Yeah.
try to get somebody to do something they don't want to do. Like I'm not in that game at all. So um, the goal of the book is to show how easy it would be to have clinical hypnosis as a complementary uh, adjunct to the medical field. So that's the goal. I got other thoughts. I'm not putting them in the book. It's like, no, keep it as narrow
Keeping
as
it.
I can. I'm actually trying to keep the book at about 200 pages. I don't want
Uh-huh.
it to be a long read.
Mm.
It might be a little bit difficult. Hey, it's challenging material. I've had to grow and stretch, but I'm hopefully putting it in an understandable way. It's not going to be as dense as reading the neuroscience research papers. And
Mhm.
for those who do want to do that, all that will be in there.
Sure.
But I'm also at the end of the book, I'm going to put like a cheat code. I've got it's about a 15-page section of here's the book in a nutshell. If you're getting
Mm.
stuck, just refer to this. It's all pictographic. I can do diagrams and say, here's what we're talking about. Here's a picture of Freud. Here's a picture of Cajal duking it out. Like this is where the split happened.
Yeah.
And psychology is really having a crisis since they call it the replication crisis that kind of started in the 90s, 2000s, where um, folks were researchers are coming along and dusting off psychology papers and trying to replicate the results and finding they couldn't do it.
Mm.
And so, psychology it's in a tight spot, as they say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm taking advantage of that. Uh, could I be wrong? I'll probably be wrong about some things. Hopefully I'll be uh, either right or pointing in the right direction on others. But it just seemed to me the model of hypnosis that I learned just feels like it's dated and goes back to the 50s and is
Mhm.
just like I'm like nobody talks this way anymore. So I want to hear it from the neuroscientists. What do they do?
Yeah.
They do study interoception and exteroception and memory and state. Like, of course they study that stuff. Volume. Huge, huge, huge amounts of stuff come out on that. So I hope to put us on good footing going forward.
Love it.
So it's actually I'm like, oh God, is this going to piss off hypnotists or what? The more I write it, I'm like, no, this is like really good for us.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we've needed. So, maybe I'm guilty of writing what we've needed. That's maybe, that's my cognitive bias. And that's, um, science is let the chips fall. But I think there's plenty of let the chips fall where they may in the book.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll see. Could be a nothing burger, could get crickets. I hope not. I hope folks will read it. I'm trying to make it merciful.
Well, it
I'm
it
not going to do
sounds
a 700-page book for my first book,
yeah,
and
it
author it's
sounds really
making me too long as it is.
fascinating. Like, you've done a ton of research and talked to all kinds of people. I'm excited to read this when you're ready to release it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Oh,
if
I'm ready.
somebody
My
wants
wife is
to
ready. We're ready. My cats are ready. You know, it's like get the book done,
how does
Jen.
somebody stay in touch with you if they want to learn more about you, James?
I am on, let's see, well, jamesmharrison.com is my website.
Mhm.
And that's just, I'm not a huge social media guy. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky, which was the guy who made Twitter in the first place, Jack Ramsey,
Dor Dorsey?
Dorsey. Yeah, yeah, whatever. Another maybe
Mhm.
strange person. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. But I've been on Twitter since the 1800s. I got on it maybe day two. I was there pretty early.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely on team fuck Elon Schmuck. But
Uh-huh.
um, so there's an alternative, and a lot of interesting folks are going to Blue Sky.
Okay.
So I'm there, and I'm on Facebook in the hypnosis channels. I pay attention to that stuff. So if somebody has a question, like David Ruby has this great evidence-based hypnosis channel on Facebook for more of the sciency folks.
Mhm.
I came out of the woo world in a lot of ways. That was
Yeah.
my intro, was shadow work. Um, but right now I'm doing the science stuff.
I'll
So
make sure
yeah.
to I'll make sure to have links to all those different places that you
Okay.
just
Great.
described in the show notes. And if there's one thing that you want people to leave with today, what is that, James?
Do your own shadow work in midlife, in group settings, or what I should say is don't do that. That's what worked for me, you know. So full disclosure, but it's the non-cognitive, non-thinky type of work that I think is the most profound, getting in touch with the parts of yourself that you don't want the outside world to see, that you
Hmm.
hide or repress or deny. My intro to it came through doing it in a group where they don't let you off the hook as long as you agree to be there. You know, that that kind of stuff is best addressed when you're fully cognitively intact and have a lot of agency in midlife, because by end of life it's too late. Like, I'm
Mm.
not trying to fix my folks at end of life. I'm just trying to love on them and
Yeah.
make them feel safe. And you know, God knows I get to go buy beer and cigarettes for them. Like, what the hell? Here I am, a hypnotist, but they don't want to stop smoking or drinking. That's their coping
Yeah.
mechanism. And so, I'm not there to change them. I'm there to love on them. But, for all of you middle-aged folks who are cognitively intact and interested in this kind of work, do every modality under the sun till you find what resonates for you, and then be a helper. We need more helpers. The world's got enough hotheads.
Love it.
Right
Thank you
on,
so
buddy.
much for your time today,
You
James.
bet.
It's been fascinating to talk with you.
Love it, Josh. Good to see you. Thanks very much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please go ahead and leave me a 5-star review on this podcast. That's really the best way to expand this message, and it would mean a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube so you can stay up to date with Super States. Also, let me know what kind of topics or guests you'd like me to cover in future episodes. You can just respond in the comments below. You can also find me on nearly all the social media sites out there at Joshua Ray Peters. That's REY. I promise I'll answer your comments. I'll see you all next week. Remember now, you carry the seeds of change inside. So stay curious, keep growing, and embrace your transformation.